Welcome to another edition of Retracing History here on Redoubt Productions. We are in downtown Lexington, Virginia. Of course, this is the home of the Virginia Military Institute. And if you're familiar with the American Civil War, you know Lexington for two things. One, this is where the VMI cadets came from that fought at the Battle of Newmarket. It's also the home of General Thomas Stonewall Jackson. And on this edition of Retracing History, we're actually going to get to go and explore Jackson's home, which is right behind me here in Lexington, Virginia. Can't wait to check this place out. When Thomas Jackson purchased his stately residence in Lexington, he was far from the renowned general named Stonewall. Since 1851, Major Jackson had been employed at the Virginia Military Institute, both as a professor of natural and experimental philosophy, as well as an artillery instructor. He was a deeply pious and socially awkward character around town, but nevertheless proved a devoted member of the community through business relations and Presbyterian church activity. He had hoped of starting a family, but his initial efforts ended in tragedy when his first wife died in childbirth. It would take a few years before he mustered the courage to wed again, this time to Mary Anna Morrison. In 1858, the couple acquired and moved into this brick and stone house along Washington Street, marking the first time Thomas had owned a home. The house was first established out of brick in 1800. A stone addition was added in 1845 to accommodate the previous owner's medical practice. The property had an ample room for a back garden, something that the Jacksons were keen on maintaining, and the museum staff tend to regularly to this day. Its interior is now furnished based upon the recollections of Anna, who lived into the 20th century and played a crucial role in shaping her husband's legacy during the post-war years. The Jacksons' mornings began with prayer in the parlor room, a practice so sacred to Thomas that nobody was allowed to enter or leave during his personal service. There was one instance noted of Anna being locked out of morning prayer due to tardiness, though her tardiness is said to have humored Thomas more than upset him. In fact, Thomas was a stickler at keeping doors shut throughout the house to better control the temperature of each room. Heating was provided by a series of cast iron stoves that were more often acquired from ironworks during the Jacksons' frequent vacations to the northern states. The most impressive of these acquisitions is a massive iron oven in the basement of the house. However, it was not Anna who would have used it, but enslaved individuals. During the time the Jacksons lived on Washington Street, their needs were tended to by a half-dozen slaves of African descent. While information is limited, multiple names and descriptions have been compiled by the staff at the Jackson House Museum. Based upon accounts left behind by Anna, it appears women of older age named Amy were the main cooks, and likely reside in the basement to always tend to the oven. Anna would later describe Amy as being the best cook and a treasure in her housekeeping education. So this is not the carriage, but this is an example of a mid-19th century Rockaway carriage, which Thomas Jackson actually purchased when his mother-in-law visited the residence here in Lexington. And Jackson kept possession of it, probably used it a few times while he was living here to go out, commute outside of Lexington, Virginia. And then when the war began, he actually instructed his wife to sell the Rockaway carriage to a Mr. Tebbs, to sell the carriage, the horses, the whole thing, because, as he puts it down here, he is a minister of the gospel. Thomas was not a beloved instructor at the Institute, being described as a strict taskmaster as precise as a multiplication table. His lectures were far from the most riveting, with most cadets deriding him as Tom Fool. But he held his cadets to such a high standard of education and etiquette, for he held himself to such a standard. Thomas's upbringing was a rough one, with both of his parents dying when he was young, and he lacked a formal education beyond the military. He made up for this by devoting any free time he found to reading. He would pore through tomes upon returning from the Institute, while remaining on his feet at a standing desk. As evenings wound down, Anna would often find him seated facing the wall, a tool Thomas found helpful to memorize the lessons he was to deliver the following day. One of the coolest relics the museum preserves from Jackson's time in Lexington is this portable file used to transfer documents between home and the Institute. Very different from the paper and plastic file folders carried in briefcases today. To those watching, what do you think? Should we bring these fabric files back into fashion? Also exhibited are his classroom key and an inkwell, which was one of several items he acquired during a European tour in 1856. Another artifact from that tour is this nifty calling card case, featuring the Church of Magdalene from Paris, France. You know, in case Thomas ever wanted to have one of these moments at the Institute.
Oh my God, it even has a watermark.
The house was the foundation for the Jacksons to live what they hoped would be a long and fruitful life in Lexington. But everyone watching is likely aware that this was not meant to be. The national debate over slavery was boiling into an outright crisis that was starting to touch the lives of each and every American. Thomas was not spared, for in the fall of 1859, the Institute was ordered by the state governor to furnish a guard to the execution of John Brown. This was after his failed raid on the federal arsenal and armory at Harper's Ferry. The tensions are made vivid when you realize Thomas's job at the execution was to man howitzers, a artillery piece expressly designed to lob exploding shells at an enemy, for there was a real fear a plot would be sprung by abolitionists to free Brown. The Jacksons tried to persevere, but in April of 1861, their tranquil lives came crashing down as it did for all of Americans. In the aftermath of the firing on Fort Sumter, the state of Virginia quarreled amongst itself over how it would react. Lexington was a community with Unionist sympathies, with people who founded it having immigrated from Pennsylvania and other northern states into the Shenandoah Valley. But as for the cadets themselves, there was a fierce component supportive of secession. Following a confrontation over raising rival flags in Lexington, Thomas was requested by VMI superintendent to speak sense into the cadets. Perhaps the superintendent anticipated the dullest instructor would numb the mob's eagerness for violence. The words that followed shocked all in attendance. Military men make short speeches, and as for myself, I am no hand at speaking anyhow. The time for war has not yet come, but it will come, and that's soon. And when it does come, my advice is to draw the sword and throw the scabbard. Things only deteriorated from there. Just 2 days after Thomas's bold remarks, President Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers from states whose governments were still loyal to the federal government to march upon the states deemed in rebellion. Secession, which was hotly contested amongst Virginians, tipped ever so slightly in favor of the firebrands. The militias that may have been sent to Washington, D.C. were instead directed to Richmond in anticipation of joining the Confederacy in full-scale conflict. Thomas left Lexington to lead VMI cadets to Richmond before accepting a colonelcy in the Confederate Army. Before leaving his home, he would join Anna in reading 2 Corinthians chapter 5. In the parlor room today, a Bible Thomas intended to send to his sister as a gift is open on that final chapter of the Jacksons' lives in Lexington. Anna would remove to her family estate in North Carolina, only meeting her husband on a handful of occasions thereafter. The couple did have 2 children, but only their second daughter lived to adulthood. Both Anna and Julia spent considerable time in the post-war years involved with Confederate veteran organizations, lecturing about Thomas's exploits. Anna maintained possession over the Lexington house, with the off chance Julia may one day need the home. While Julia did marry and have children of her own life came to an end at just 26 years of age. In 1907, Anna chose to sell the house to a chapter of the Daughters of the Confederacy. The Daughters converted the property into the Stonewall Jackson Hospital. What's impressive is this was the only hospital in Rockbridge County for approximately a half century. This also bookends how the house had already been renovated once earlier for medical practice. This was its function until the hospital relocated to another place, and the house was sold to the Virginia Military Institute, who restored it to its 1850s appearance as best as possible. Today, visitors have access to both an audio tour and staff to guide them through the Jacksons' brief but important occupancy. Inside the museum store, there is a small gallery of artifacts pertaining to Thomas and Anna's life, as well as these awesome crazy socks about Thomas's beard game, which I did not buy, but I did buy the graphic on a note card. We just departed the Jackson home here in Lexington, and we're about to enjoy some local Lexington chocolate.
It looks really good.
Looks really good. You got the big one.
Yeah, I got the big one.
You got the big boy. I got the little one with Jackson's actual signature on it. So enjoy this work of art now because it's about to be digested.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I've always wanted to come and see the Jackson house. I hate to say it, ever since I've watched the movie Gods and Generals and saw, albeit a very CGI brick house on the street here in Lexington. I've always wanted to come and get to see the house of General Jackson. Finally got to do it today. Really enjoyed it. If you ever get a chance, come and visit. Very great staff here. The actual property is self-guided, but they do have staff members that answer any questions you may have. Learned a lot about the property and how it's evolved over. It's almost, actually, over 200 years of existence. The house goes back 50 years before Jackson even owned it. Well, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button down below. If you want to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe here to Redoubt Productions. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting me, you could go to my Ko-fi page. Link is in the description below. Thank you for visiting, and we'll see you next time.